Let's talk about SJR5, Rock of Bral by L. Richard Baker III, often known as Richard Baker for simplicity. So this is a city supplement, and city supplements in D&D span a spectrum. If you've read a lot, you can kind of identify where along the spectrum. On one end, you have books which are really designed as extended adventure locations. I don't mean they don't describe a city, but the city is detailed really so you can run an adventure in it. So Gabor Lux's Backlin Jewel of the Seas is a lot like that. And on the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, you have, I suppose, the opposite. It might be a book that has some detailed areas, but really it's a toolkit. Here's how you could create or generate or detail this place. So something, the one that seems most obvious there is Vornheim by Zach S. And in the middle, you've got, say, the very detailed city-state of the Invincible Overlord, insanely detailed, lots of details on locations, but not really like, oh, here's an adventure location with these rooms and these guards. More like here is what's on this street in lots of detail. Here are some rumours to do with this specific area. It might also describe something like FR1, Waterdeep in the North, or again, I think Fever Dreaming Marlinko, which I reviewed recently as part of a Hill Cantons review, is in the middle somewhere. It has two detailed adventure locations, but a lot of the book is really a toolkit for generating your own content in Marlinko. So yeah, you've got that spectrum from toolkit to a kind of adventure location, I guess you could say. Toolkit, adventure location. And Rock of Bral is in the middle, much like it's the fairly close in time released FR1, Waterdeep in the North, which I think that was from 1989. This is 1992. They're both early-ish second edition D&D, and a lot of the things they're doing are certainly pre-player options, and through a period of time where there is a coherent aesthetic, even if it's very different to first edition. And it's not really... So yes, between first edition and the Baroque high style of Broussard Cordell, for instance. Now, this, as I say, it's in the middle, and I think it's a very good city supplement. I might put it in my top 5, for instance. It's about the Rock of Bral. It's a Spelljammer product. The Rock of Bral is an asteroid that floats in space, in whatever area you're choosing to detail, and it can be placed anywhere in a campaign world. And it's got two sides to an asteroid. On the top, it's got a city. On the bottom, it's got farmland and a military citadel. It's ruled by a prince. It's basically a high fantasy city in space, and that is a lot of what Spelljammer is. It's high fantasy in magical space. And Spelljammer was a only partially successful line in terms of popularity compared to Planescape. And I think Planescape, for instance, which replaced it really, Dark Sun as well, both are a lot more baroque, both a lot more intense. Some would say a lot more creative in terms of, more fresh concepts. And whereas Spelljammer, I think, always suffered for a lot of people from being in. There are a few problems, but one was that maybe it's too familiar in terms of some of its tropes. We'll touch on that later. Now, I want to say what the weaknesses are first. I think this is good, but there are significant weaknesses that kind of have to be reckoned with, I think. The first is just it's badly overwritten and padded. It's 96 pages, and if that was all, all meat, then great. But it's not all meat. The 40 pages of that is a gazetteer of the city, which sounds great, but it could be halved without losing very much. It's just sometimes written in a very bland way. I had, I think, a particularly good example of this, which I'll now surely not be able to find. But this sense that, here it is, 101, the lesser market. While it pales in comparison to the great market of the middle city, the lesser market is still quite a fascinating place. There are far fewer craftsmen and artisans here, and most of the stores are run by peddlers and small merchants. Quite a few fast talkers make this their home as well. Many of the booths are simple shell games or ring-around-the-bottle scams, designed to separate the spacefarer from his hard-earned gold. Because of this, the lesser market tends to have a more festive and less mercantile atmosphere, because of all the thieving. Most common trades and services are represented here, including astrologers, beggars, and a whole other list. And it has some useful information on price listings. The idea that it's a kind of a crappy market, and that The Great Market is really much better, much more serious, whereas this is a bit more like oh, you know, you pay some money, you take your chance, maybe you win, maybe you lose. I like that, but just the writing is bland. It has weird detail. Some of the well, when I say the writing's bland, some is actively bad. Saying the lesson market is still quite a fascinating place doesn't tell me why it's a fascinating place. It's kind of over conversational, filling space. And there aren't many direct hooks in the locations in the Gazetteer, which you'd think there would be. That's in City State of the Invincible Overlord. Rumour hooks go directly into the locations. In Backlane, which I think struggles somewhat with the same, it's a lot stronger because there's a lot more things where it'll say this character just wants this. You go to this location, the character tells you he wants this, and it's fairly easy to work out from there what the adventure is going to be that you know the players could choose to pursue. In that interconnected problem, there are no rumour tables or directly gameable things like that, except for some encounter tables, which are perfectly good for what it's worth. Some of the easy ways to get a player group to engage with a place they've gone to are lacking, and you have to put the work in. And that's something that when you're paying for a product, you want to put less work in than if you're making it up yourself, right? And this isn't a problem for me, but as I say, this is vanilla high fantasy in Magic space. It's not as obviously wacky and inventive as Planescape, but even say Planar Compass, which you can see kind of draws on both Spelljammer and Planescape, the modern zine series. This is mostly, you know, these are the different races or ancestries from across the D&D world. They're meeting in space. There's some differences, there's some similarities, there's some cool twists, but on the whole, with this rule superstructure that's slightly different, it's the game you know, the second edition D&D you know, which for lots of people they don't like. I like, however, so it's not a problem for me, but it's worth kind of caveat emptoring that this is vanilla high fantasy. Well, what's strong about it? I said this is in my top 5, maybe even higher city books. What's good about it? Well, one, it's nowhere near as detailed as City State of the Invincible Overlord. It is very textured. The one thing about that 40-page Gazetteer is, even if it's overlong, there's a lot of stuff there. There's lots of places. It feels like a city full of people and conflicts and opportunities. The NPCs are all pretty good, on the whole, the major NPCs at least. There are a couple of times where you kind of think, oh, great, bland character trait attached to character name. But usually they're quite interesting. They're high fantasy tropes effectively executed. There is a ruthless but effective prince. There's the rightful heir, his nephew, who maybe he should be on the throne, but you know, do you want to risk success? There's the slightly manic palace vizier. There's all kinds of other NPCs you can engage with who are worth engaging with, who are good characters. 2, it has really good factional detail. Without necessarily being literally the best in its class, you know, it has very good factional detail that means you can imagine players engaging with factions, being hired by factions, playing off factions against factions, which is what players pretty much always love to do if they're engaged in that side of the game. You know, there's Prince Andrew and his nephew, the rivals for the throne in a way, with different good claims in a sense. There's the different underbarons who run the criminal underworld. There's the different churches, and that's one thing Spelljammer has a kind of interesting spin on, to do with gods who don't have worship outside of their home crystal sphere, don't have significant power in that sphere, and so their priests, second edition clerics, only get up to second level spells. And so you've got this kind of the religious factional interplay that comes up a bit. And you've got other kind of weird things, secret societies, or not all secret, but certainly societies who want things. There's some people who want freedom, and there's some people who want to pursue a slaving ring in the midst of this anti-slavery city. All of that is ripe for the table. That's stuff that you can use. Yeah, you have to think about how to rumour drop it or engage the players in it, but once they're there, it's very usable and simple. 3, it's a really good home base type of city, so it's not necessarily, it doesn't need to be the standalone city campaign where the players are always in the city, which you could see that for instance, the Wicked City setting of Joseph Manola, if you were to just run the city, there's more than enough there for your players to stay there for the whole campaign. You know, it's not that kind of campaign. It is rather well, it can be, but rather it's kind of expected it might be a home base as well, because this is a Spelljammer. People are going to explore. There's a number of ideas presented for what you can do in space beyond the rock. People might hire you to do this or that. It could be better organised, but that information is there. You can easily connect it with other Spelljammer adventures as well, and there are some pretty good Spelljammer adventures out there too. So you could say, oh yes, this is where I'll connect this NPC who brings them into this adventure. It's a natural and attractive, bustling, interesting home base with lots of things to do. It's intentionally positioned as a setting that can be moved to any crystal sphere, and it works well as that. It's interesting and it's portable, which isn't always the case. 4, the section on involving characters in the campaign is actually quite good. It's a bit padded, I think it's fair to say. But I mean, in terms of actual adventure ideas, there's only 4 official adventure seeds on a single page here, which I think is not an impressive feature. You know, if you're going to put 96 pages in a book, you could make sure that the last one is not in fact an advert for a novel, but instead is more adventure ideas. People are paid money for this, you know. But yeah, the stuff that is meant to connect players in, each major class gets most of a page to talk about how it might be connected via different classes. And you can also, it does give details for starting a low-level campaign there, which in Spelljammer terms is, I think, unique, because Spelljammer is really aimed at 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th level characters upward. So it says, no, start them at 2nd or 3rd level, because it's quite a tough home environment, and just do low-level adventures on the Rock of Bral, and maybe they could hire out as guards occasionally, or whatever else, you know, on a spelljamming ship going into magical space. So it gives you a scale, a spectrum of campaign ideas, of building in your players into it when they're already halfway through a campaign or are starting at mid-level, or of starting them off as low-level characters as if it was just a normal low-level campaign. But in space, that's also fun. 5, there's some really nice specific stuff. There's cool hooks. As I've said, there's a few things where we'll be like, oh, this person wants this. And you think, well, that's quite easy for me to link in, even if it's not presented well. There's this slaving ring operating in the Underdark. Remember, it's an asteroid, so you've got the top, the bottom, and in the middle there's an Underdark. And there is a slaving ring there, so people might want to go and adventure to free the slaves, or I don't know, maybe profit off the slaves, depending on the kind of party. And some of the weird Spelljammer unique stuff is fitted in quite well. So that's one thing. Spelljammer is generic high fantasy, but it does have its own twist in the tail. It does bring in new ancestries particularly, as well as the ships and the mechanics, which are quite fun. The Arcane, the Drakon, the Gif are all here. The Gif are actually a bit obnoxious as presented here, like, they just always want to fight, and that's all. But no, the Arcane and the Drakon are fit in quite nicely, and I enjoyed their presentation. The final big advantage I want to mention is the map. And there's actually 2 maps of the Rock of Bral. The other is in the core Spelljammer one. But this is just an incredibly usable map on the whole. You can argue that, but basically it is a fairly easy to read map. Nice clear detail here, nice clear art. There's the Lake of Bral. That's the kind of royal palace side over there. Here's the city, and you can see you also have the lower side as well, with the fields and the fortress. And it's all numbered as well, with a consistent numbering system, and there's a mini-map too of the different districts. And I think nice artifacts are nice, obviously, but also it's usable. It's not a kind of, oh, that's pretty but impossible to use. It is something where you can say, you're going up this street. Basically, in a city game, having a map which you can refer to and say, you got this street. You can see on your left this is happening over the road. There's this location. That's good. That's really useful at the table. So a good player aid. This is, on the whole, a well-executed product. It has flaws, undoubtedly, but it is rich. It is, I think, immersive. It's a great sandbox. It makes a point that it sees its job as presenting a place where players can... Well, there's some stuff about kind of so they know how to roleplay better and pursue their aims better. And you can read that in a slightly World of Darkness guffy way. But really it's saying, look, here's a city, I've detailed it, Richard Baker says, so that your players can engage with it and make it their own and change it and shake it up. And, you know, it's a sandbox, basically. And it does do that very successfully. You could go in a number of directions. Your players could gain influence on the rock. They could engage in the politics of the prince and his nephew or the underworld. They could build links with the mercenary company or found their own and go and do particular kinds of jobs using the rock as a base. And then obviously can be rivals with other companies. You could connect the players to sages. They could go exploring. They could become... and I think that's a really fun Spelljammer concept, of course, by the way. The kind of Star Trek, The Next Generation concept of lots of weird, interesting stuff out there. Lots of allegorical stories to engage with in magical space. All sorts of routes are available. And I think, all in all, that's a good city supplement, isn't it? Something your players can make their own and they can shape to their own desires, but in a way that you as a DM find usable at the table. So that's why the Rock of Bral is, for me, one of the best city supplements. If you've read it, tell me what you think in the comments. Till next time.